Today we're casting the new Skagit Scout from Airflo, and these are such fun lines on little switch rods and shorter spey rods. And I wanted to talk about an issue that I see quite often when people transition maybe from a longer Skagit head to these shorter heads. And one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people do fairly well when they're casting off their off shoulder. So let's say you're a right-handed caster and you're casting cack-handed, and they're casting off their left shoulder, they do well, but then on their right shoulder they tend to struggle. So we're going to talk about 3 tips that'll help you with your right shoulder cast, whether that's a snap tee or a parry poke. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the start position when you actually go to set up your anchor. So as a rule, you always want to start with your fly line straight down below you in the water, with your rod tip right next to the water surface, and that's going to help you really move that fly when it's at depth. So a lot of people, when they learn how to cast longer heads, started with their hands crossed, and they would do a snap tee like this. And the problem with this is it oftentimes puts you out of position as you get into your forward cast, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But as an alternative, what I want you guys to try is starting with your left hand on your left hip. So this is going to feel a little awkward at first because your feet are going to be really planted at your target. But if you cock your whole body towards the bank, start with that left hand all the way over here on the left side of your body. Now as you do this, you want to make sure that your rod tip is in line with the rest of your fly line and not kind of offset pointing out over the river. So this will feel really weird at first, but we're going to start our snap tee movement right from that position. So let me show you what that looks like. And I think there's a couple advantages to this. One is I think it's easier to lift flies out of the water, but I think the bigger thing is it's going to set you up for a better forward cast and a firing position here in just a minute. So we're going to strip in, start with our left hand on our left hip all the way over here. We're going to make our anchor setup and we're going to come back to that same position. Let me do that one more time. And this again, it's going to feel a little weird at first, but give it a little practice and it'll become normal soon enough. Okay, so now that we've got our anchor set up, we're going to talk a little bit about what our D-loop is doing. So when we form our D-loop with these shorter heads, I like to throw kind of a higher sweep, which helps me throw my anchor a little bit lower to the water. So I sort of envision the idea of a martini glass. So from my anchor setup, I'm going to make a vertical lift up to about 30 degrees. Now, this is what I want you guys to really focus on, is what your hands are doing. So if your rod tip is going to track this martini glass, in other words, your rod's going to be tracking in a circle, a flat circle, your hands have to do the same thing. And so the motion is almost like throwing a frisbee. Your hand has to go out. A lot of people, when they start to sweep, their hand actually comes back flat. And what this is going to do is ultimately put your hand or your elbow behind your body. The same thing happens when you cross your hands on this setup and you sweep with your hands crossed. A lot of times that elbow comes back here, and we're going to talk about why that's bad here in a second. So let's just watch that sweep, and I'll do this without even casting here. I've just got the line looped off my rod, and I want you to think about if your rod tip is going to go in a circle out and around, your top hand is going to go in a circle as well. So it's extending out almost to the point where you're locking your elbow, but not quite. So as I come out, I'm coming out to here, and I'm thinking about, as I'm doing this, really kind of keeping my hands inside of a box. My box is as wide as my shoulders, up to my eyes and down to my belly button. So as I get to the edge of my box here, my rod tip, I'll kind of turn so you guys can see this, my rod tip keeps moving on that plane, but my bottom hand is doing most of the work. So in other words, my hand is a swivel, if you will, or a pivot point. So I'm going to be pivoting around with that top hand, letting the bottom hand drive the rod tip around and into the firing position. Now why this is key is, if you look at where my elbow ended up here, my elbow is in front of my body. And what I want you to see here, let me get the fly line out of the way. If your elbow drops back here for whatever reason, I want you to look at the distance from the butt of your rod to your chest, okay? If I move that elbow further out in front of me and my wrist is cocked at almost a 90-degree angle, look at how that distance almost doubles. So one of the keys to making a very stable long loop is a long stroke length. There's a couple other things in there, but that's one of the things we're going to focus on. So just to summarize everything, think about starting on your left hand, on your left hip, make your anchor set right back to that position. Make your lift, let your hand track out in front of you and let it become the pivot drive it around, and focus on keeping that elbow in one spot. And like I said, you can do this without even casting. Just practice keeping that elbow in one spot and letting your top hand really let the rod move around, using your bottom hand to drive it. So let's put that all into action so you can see it. So we're going to start left hand, left hip, make our anchor setup, come right back to that position. Let me reset my anchor here. Make my lift, sweep around, keep that elbow in one spot. So when you think about being compact, think about those three things. It'll really help you on your left shoulder, I guarantee it. So I hope these fundamentals help you with your strong shoulder cast. If you're getting big open loops or tailing loops, this will really help you. For more information, visit airflowusa.com, or you can check out my Skagit casting video, Skagit Revolution.